Have you ever told someone something personal, something deep, and then wished you could take it back? I have, and if you're a man over 50, there's a good chance you have too. We think we're doing the right thing. We think that opening up will help us feel closer, feel connected. We're told that being vulnerable is the brave thing to do, that sharing will make the loneliness smaller. But no one tells you what happens when your truth is put in the wrong hands. No one warns you that after a certain age, the damage isn't just emotional. It's personal. It's permanent. It was the year after my divorce. I was rebuilding, trying to figure out who I was without the title of husband attached to my name. And like most men, I was lonely, not just for affection, for someone to talk to, someone to understand the weight I had been carrying. So when I met someone who seemed kind, who asked the right questions, who listened, really listened, I let my guard down. I told her about the mistakes, about the years I spent working too much, the debt I racked up trying to hold everything together, the nights I slept in my car so my kids wouldn't feel the chaos. I told her things I hadn't even said out loud to myself, and for a moment, it felt good, safe, like I was finally being seen. But safety, I've learned, isn't a feeling. It's a pattern, and it's tested with time. What I didn't realize was that people don't always listen to understand. Sometimes they listen to collect your words, your wounds, your regrets. And one day when they're angry or bored or insecure, they'll throw those words back at you, twist them, mock them, use them to remind you who you were, not who you've become. That's what happened to me. During an argument that started over something small, she suddenly said, "No wonder your wife left. You were a financial mess back then." That line didn't just hurt, it shattered something. Because it told me one thing, crystal clear. She didn't see the man I was now. She still held me hostage to the man I used to be, and I had put the key in her hand. That's when I learned the first rule of surviving life after 50. Not everyone deserves access to your story. Not because your story isn't valuable, but because your peace is. And you don't need to trade peace for temporary connection. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. No music, no distractions, just me and the echo of my own words, handed over too soon. I remembered something my grandfather once said to me. He said, "The older you get, the quieter your truth should become." I never understood it as a kid, but now it made sense. There's a power in silence, a safety in mystery. When you share everything with everyone, you give them the power to define you, to freeze you in a version of yourself you've already outgrown. And when you try to move forward, they pull you back, not because they hate you, but because your growth challenges their understanding of you. It makes them uncomfortable, because if you can change, so can they. And not everyone's ready for that. So they'll hold on to your past to keep themselves feeling stable. But that's not your burden to carry. You've already carried enough. So here's the truth. Being open is not wrong, but being selective is wise. Because the world doesn't reward oversharing. It punishes it. Especially for men. Especially after 50. You're not expected to have feelings. And when you show them, people don't know what to do with them. So they label you weak, wounded, unstable. But what they don't see is what it took for you to open up in the first place. And they never will. Because the only one who truly understands your journey is you. That night, I made a promise to myself. No more open books handed to people who haven't earned the right to read. No more giving away pages of my life for a temporary nod of empathy. From now on, I speak less. I listen more. And I watch who leans in when I say nothing. Because those are the people who deserve to know more. The weeks after that night were quiet. Too quiet. I stopped calling people just to fill the silence. I stopped explaining myself in conversations. And slowly, I began to notice something I had never paid attention to before. Silence reveals. It shows you who actually cares. It shows you who reaches out when you stop reaching first. Most didn't. Most disappeared. And that was painful at first. It felt like another loss, another failure. But then it hit me. Maybe it wasn't a loss. Maybe it was clarity. Because when you stop oversharing, when you stop giving every piece of yourself away, the room gets quieter, the noise fades, and the truth comes forward. Not everyone was meant to hold your story. Not everyone is safe. Not everyone has earned the right to know you. I started thinking about all the times I had shared too much. My weaknesses, my regrets, my mistakes, and how quickly those things had been turned into weapons when someone was angry or jealous or needed to feel bigger. It wasn't just words, it was power. My power, and I had been giving it away for free. That realization felt like a punch in the gut, but it also felt like a key to a door I didn't even know I could close. I began to practice something new. Selective silence, not the cold kind of silence that punishes, the protective kind, the kind that says, I am not an open book anymore. You can't just pick me up and flip through the pages. At first, it was uncomfortable. I had spent years thinking openness meant honesty, and honesty meant virtue. But after 50, I learned something different. Openness without discernment is self-betrayal. Because when you hand someone your weaknesses, your dreams, your pain, you're also handing them the ability to distort it. And once it's out there, you can't pull it back. It becomes their story about you, not your truth. I remember one afternoon, sitting at a diner off the highway. A man about my age sat down across from me. We started talking. It was small talk at first: weather, sports, traffic. Then he asked me about my divorce. I smiled politely and said, some things take time to explain, and some things stay with me. He looked at me for a second, then nodded slowly. You're right, he said. And we moved on. That was it. No drama, no oversharing, no regret later. And I realized in that moment boundaries don't have to be harsh. They can be quiet, gentle, but firm. A few months later, someone asked me about my financial situation. I used to answer those questions without thinking. Tell them about the business deals, the debts, the wins and losses. But now, I just say, I'm comfortable, and leave it there. Because the truth is, the more details you give, the more stories people build about you. And their stories aren't always kind. They're shaped by jealousy, by bias, by their own unresolved fears. I think about a friend of mine, Susan. She dreamed of driving cross-country after she retired. When she told people about it, they tried to talk her out of it. You're too old. What if your car breaks down? It's dangerous for a woman traveling alone. She almost cancelled the trip, but something in her pushed back. She stopped telling people. She just planned quietly, and one morning, she packed her car and left. No announcements, no debates, and she had the time of her life. That story stuck with me, because it's not just about being private. It's about protecting the spark inside you from the water of other people's fears. When you tell them your dreams too early, they project their doubts onto you. They hand you their limitations disguised as concern. And before you know it, you've abandoned something that could have changed your life. I did that for years. Shared ideas too soon. Let people talk me out of them, and then wondered why nothing ever felt finished. Now, I move differently. I build quietly. I protect my inner world until it's strong enough to stand on its own. And I share later when it's real, when it's built, when it's no longer fragile. Because after 50, you realize something powerful. Peace isn't just a feeling, it's a strategy. And part of that strategy is knowing what to share, when to share, and with whom. It doesn't make you secretive, it makes you sovereign. The old me thought silence meant weakness. The man I am now knows silence is a shield, not to hide behind, but to protect what matters until it's ready. Until you're ready. That's the cost of oversharing. You give away your leverage. You invite manipulation. You let someone else's reaction shape your choices. And in the end, you're left cleaning up the mess of your own vulnerability. I had to learn that lesson the hard way, but once I did, everything changed. I felt lighter, not because I was alone, but because I was no longer bleeding out my story to people who hadn't earned it. Now, when I sit across from someone, I watch more than I talk. I listen to what they say, and what they don't. I see who leans in when I'm silent, because those are the ones who might be safe. Might, but I don't rush it anymore. Connection takes time. Trust takes testing. And my story? It's not a gift for everyone. It's a privilege for the few. Top of form. There's a moment every man faces after 50. A moment when you realize the biggest threats to your peace aren't out there. They're in here. In the things you say too quickly. The people you trust too easily. The truths you share too freely. And by the time you figure that out, you've already paid for it. I had to learn that lesson like most men do. By bleeding. By watching something I thought was sacred get twisted. by hearing my own words used against me like daggers. But pain is a teacher that never whispers. It teaches with clarity. And if you survive it, if you really pay attention, it gives you something rare. It gives you wisdom. That's where I was when it happened. I looked in the mirror one morning and didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because I was lost, but because I was new. He looked stronger, not in his body, in his boundaries. He looked sharper, not in his clothes, in his silence. That morning, I understood the metaphor I had heard years ago but never truly felt. A snake sheds its skin not because it wants to, but because it has to. It's outgrown the old one, and holding on to it would mean suffocation. That's what I had done. I shed the old skin. The skin of the man who over-explained, who confessed too quickly, who gave too much, too fast, to too many. I let that version of me die quietly, and in his place stood someone else. Someone who didn't fear solitude. Someone who didn't chase connection like it was oxygen. Someone who understood that some stories are sacred, not secrets, but sanctuaries. Because here's what no one tells you. Your peace is built in silence. Your strength is forged in privacy. And your identity? It's protected by what you don't say. They don't teach us this as boys. They tell us to speak up, to be honest, to open up, and yes, that has value. But after 50, it comes with conditions. You can be honest without being exposed. You can be open without being invaded. You can be strong without being loud. I stopped trying to prove I had nothing to hide, and started owning the power of having things I choose not to show. That changed everything. It changed how I dated, how I did business, how I maintained friendships. When someone asked about my past, I smiled. When they asked about my plans, I paused. When they asked how I was doing, I said, better than ever. Because I was. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer outsourcing my validation to other people's reactions. I no longer needed to be understood to feel seen. I no longer needed to explain my journey to feel accepted. I had made peace with one truth. Not everyone gets to know me, and that's not cold. That's clarity. Because when you finally learn the value of your voice, you stop giving it to people who only want to echo their own. You stop hoping someone will handle your story with care, and instead, you guard it with wisdom. Not walls, but wisdom. That's what this message is about. Not fear, not bitterness. Wisdom. Wisdom that comes from being burned. From learning the difference between transparency and trust. From realizing that true connection is not built on exposure, but on discernment. The men who survive this stage of life with dignity, with strength, with peace, aren't the ones who told the most. They're the ones who kept the most to themselves. Not out of shame, but out of self-respect. So if you're watching this now, and you've been hurt by your own openness, if you've had your honesty twisted, your regrets recycled, your dreams talked down, you're not alone. We've all been there. But you don't have to stay there. You can change. You can quiet down without shutting down. You can speak less and mean more. You can protect your peace without becoming paranoid, because silence isn't distance. It's depth. And you're allowed to have depth. You're allowed to hold parts of yourself back until someone earns them. Not everyone deserves the full version of you. Especially not at hello. Especially not after 50. Let them meet the man you are now. And let the rest remain sacred. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. So if this message spoke to you, if you've ever shared too much and paid the price for it, then I hope this gave you something back. Clarity, strength, maybe even peace. If you've been through this, tell me how you handled it. Leave a comment. Share your story, not for sympathy, but because sometimes a man's truth needs to be heard by another man who's still learning when to speak and when to stay silent. Thank you for listening. Take care of your story. Take care of yourself. And remember, silence isn't emptiness. It's wisdom. Until next time.